everyone, this is Tony from Six String Corner. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to give you a quick rundown on how to change a guitar string. Many people don't know how to do that, and what they end up doing is spending money, bringing it to a store to have a guy change it, when, you know what, you can really just do this all on your own. I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough on how that's done. It is different for certain types of guitars. I'm going to give you a quick rundown on that as well. All right, so let's get started. So when we're changing our strings, one of the first things we're going to need to understand is the bridge on the guitar and how the strings go through the bridge. So here's one guitar. This is a 335 copy. And this style of bridge here, you can see how the string very simply just goes into this opening here and goes right through over the saddle. And you have to take note on how it goes over the middle of the saddle. Many of them, a lot of bridges will have the little groove in there, and you want to make sure it goes over that groove. And just follow along with that. If this is your first time, take one string off, and as you're putting the new one on, observe how the other ones go through. And you just very simply want to match how they go through that, okay? That's really all you need to do, at least at this phase of changing a string. Let me show you a couple other bridge styles. Now here's an old school guitar. In fact, it was a little bit dirty. This is actually my first guitar I ever purchased. How about that? Ibanez Junior Les Paul, purchased in 1978. I don't remember, it's way back then. So here is how this bridge works, and you will encounter many of them like this too. You actually have to thread it on the inside here, and then it comes around and it wraps around the bridge like so. And it comes right over the saddle. So you see how it comes around here and just wraps around and goes over the saddle. All right, so that's another style bridge. So if you have that one, that's how it's going to work. Here's a Fender Strat. Many people are familiar with this style. These are a little bit different. And the way you string these is through the bottom. And you will note that you have 6 holes down here. And the string threads into this hole, comes out this side, wraps around the bridge, and on up the neck. And you make sure that the strings are centered over the saddle, right here. This is my PRS, Custom 24. These strings go through very similar to how the Strat is, in that we have it underneath. Get that reflection out of there just real quick. What you want to do is thread it, just threading through a needle. You thread it right through that opening. String comes out right over the top. You swing it over and go on up the neck. Make sure that your strings are centered over the saddle. Also, one thing about these bridges that you want to pay special close attention to, as you're threading it through, make sure you pull it somewhat taut so that the ball of this string right here gets all the way as high as it can in the bridge, so it's held tightly. Sometimes if we don't hold it tight, it's kind of caught a little lower, and you start stringing it up, you'll hear a little snap. Not a big deal, you just have to retune the guitar a little bit. But just try to make sure that you're pulling it somewhat taut in there, and it'll hold pretty nicely. And then we have acoustic guitars. The vast majority of them are strung up the same way. And actually today I'm going to string up my acoustic. It is in need of new strings, so this would be a good one. Most of you probably have an acoustic. Even if you don't, after we get past the bridge, everything we do on this side is going to be about the same. So with the acoustic, and I'll show you more details as we start stringing, is you have these things called pegs, and what they're going to do is they're going to hold the string in. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on how this works in a little bit. But you put the ball of that string right through into the opening after you pull this peg out, and you put the new one in, and then you kind of pull it taut with the peg still there until it feels pretty secure, and then you run it over the bridge and on down the neck. A couple of essential tools you're going to need to change your strings on your guitar. This will be your best friend. Is a tuning peg crank. I don't know what other official name it is for that, but it basically will turn these tuners and to loosen the strings. You just grab it in there and you turn it, and it happens really quick. You can get those strings off As you can see right there, makes life a lot easier. Also, I like having some pliers. Now, these pliers have some side clippers on it too to cut the strings. You may want just pliers and maybe a separate set of side clippers. Either way, have both handy. These work in handy, just grabbing strings when you got to thread things through. I find that they've saved me more than a handful of times. Also, the clipper here to cut the strings when we're all done. You're definitely going to need that. Some guitars will also possibly require you to have a screwdriver. Depending, if you saw earlier on my PRS, those little black knobs, there's actually a screwdriver that you may just have to loosen. Some may have locking tuners here, some electric guitars where you'll need either a screwdriver. I have one old guitar that needs a Phillips screwdriver, to be honest with you. That's what I do to tighten that and to loosen. The first thing we're going to do with the strings, grab this tuning peg crank. You put it into the peg and just wind. And you loosen it as far as you want to go. You'll start to see it unravel. Now I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my, that's why these are really handy. Just took it, pulled it right out. Do that same thing with all 6 strings. This will be the first thing that you do. This next step only applies to the acoustic guitars. You're going to have these little pegs in here. So what you want to do after you loosen the string and you pulled it out of the tuning peg, what you want to do is just, I like to grab the pliers, pull it straight out. Sometimes you can just do it by hand. Be gentle with it though. You don't want to tear those things apart. They're going to be very valuable to you as far as holding the strings in. If you do break them, no big deal. They sell them at the music stores. They're relatively inexpensive. Another thing I like to do after I take all the strings off is to just kind of give it a little bit of a cleaning. It's a good chance to do it when you have all the strings off. You should really be kind of wiping it down and you should be cleaning it regularly anyway. But here I can give it a little bit extra cleaning. I do have this Martin guitar polish. There's guitar cleaners, there's guitar polishes. You find the thing that works for you. I think that the cleaner probably works a little bit better. And just give it a nice good, little bit of a, rub down, a little bit of TLC, a little loving care, just kind of get through some of the dirt out. Take special care though on the frets, especially with polish. Probably don't want to be using that on the neck. Just use a kind of a cleaner because if you get the polish, sometimes you get that little residue, and if you ever play your guitar, you might actually start to see dirt, and that picks up on the strings, could actually interfere with your tone, could interfere with your sound. One little thing you could do if you really see a lot of grime and dirt in here is get a really super fine, like a steel wool, and just lightly go over the neck. You want to take care not to scratch the top of the neck. Sometimes I just do a little bit of that just to kind of get a little bit of the, if you have any really grime in there, maybe if you sweat a lot, you might see a little bit on your neck. And now here's where we're going to start to string up the guitar. This is the part that I showed you earlier where it's going to be different if you've got different electric guitars with different bridges. There are some old Kahlers and old, especially some old Floyd Roses where you actually will have to cut the ball off. If you still have them, you would have to cut this end off, you put it in there, and there's a locking mechanism that'll lock that string in. But you definitely have to cut these things off. So if you were wondering if you got one of those old Floyd Rose bridges, with the whammy bars and all that, you might have to be doing that on your string. Make sure you got, of course, the correct strings. That's another probably important detail to pay attention to. On the packaging, they will tell you what's the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth string. The packaging should say that, and the strings go in order from the thinnest side, which is the first string, to the thickest side, which is the sixth string. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to put the ball right in here, and I put it right into in here, and I just kind of put it a little ways down. I have to put it all the way down. I take the peg, And most of these pegs will have a little groove on there, if you can see it on the camera, a little bit of a groove. What I do is I just trace the groove as I pull it in here. Now I don't put it all the way in yet, and I pull up so that the ball, or at least what it will feel like, the ball of that string is at the bottom of that peg. And then I push down on the peg. But what I do is I push down, then I give it just a little bit of a turn so that those grooves help to lock it in. And it should fit in pretty nice as you do that. If it doesn't, you might need to replace the peg. Maybe it's a little bit worn, or it could be the wrong size. I've seen that happen before, although I've always thought these were standard, but they might not be. And that's how you start. So here's the part where we're going to string up the guitar through the tuning pegs. Now, what I like to do, this is just a little quirk of mine probably, but what I like to do is, I don't know if you can see it here, but you got the holes in there. I don't know if you can kind of see how that looks. And what the holes are, I like to have them turned inward in sort of a 45-ish degree angle. The only reason I like doing that is just a little thing. It's probably not a big deal, but it just is easier for me to get the strings into the posts. So I just like to turn them in, and then on this side we just turn it this way. Also, another thing to always check on, and I'm going to just give you a quick rundown on this. Sometimes these pegs are a little loose, and there's this little hex nuts here. Sometimes I just have to just tighten them just a tiny bit. Do not over tighten. Be very careful. If you're not sure of this, don't do this. This should be take this in if you think that they're loose. And also the pegs here, there's these little screws right here. Sometimes these things they're a little bit loose. What I find I have to do is I just have to tighten them just a little bit so that they're not as loose anymore. Okay, if you're not really comfortable with this is something you should not do. But if you feel like you're going to be a little bit adventuresome, do it. Just take very good care on how you do that on the tuning pegs. Be back in just 1 second to get that done. So here's where the magic happens. I take the string and I thread it through like so. Now, what I like to do, move the guitar a little bit here so you can see what I'm talking about, is I like to leave a little bit of slack. So I'm pulling on the string on the other side. You can't see it, but I'm pulling it through there. And then what I like to do, let me just get this camera up here. Then what I like to do here, I like to pull it up a little bit so I have a little bit of slack. So you want to try and get about 3 or 4 winds around that post to get it hooked in as best you can. And I found right about there, I put these 3 fingers, that's about how much slack I want. Now, I'm still holding it with my left hand. Let me just turn this a little bit here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Hopefully I can get the whole thing in here. There we go. So I'm holding pulling it through with my left hand. In my right hand, so I gave it a little bit of slack. And then what I like to do is I just like to push it down, just to hold it in place on this side. That's all I'm doing. I'm just holding it in place. That's it. So then what we do here, we crimp the string. We literally bend it so that we have a crimp on the inside. It should be crimped inside to the inside of the headstock. This is the headstock here. Then I take the remaining string, put it underneath, like so. So I just wrapped it underneath that string. So right now we're underneath, the string is facing this way. Then I take this string right here and I crimp it again over the string, just like that. Now, note, on my right hand, I'm pulling it taut here so that we can get it nice and firm in here at the post. And so then it should hold if you crimp them. So again, you thread it through, crimp to the inside of the guitar, take it, go underneath the string, wrap it around, crimp it again tight to the post while you're taking your right hand and pulling it taut like that. Also make sure at this point that you're in the nut groove. This is the nut of the guitar and you got the little grooves the string sits in. Can't tell you how many times I've actually missed this but you want to make sure that it's in this groove. On your Stratocaster guitar, there are what you call these, they call them trees. You want to make sure that the strings are in the trees. And I'll show you that in just a sec. But right now, we hold it through like this, all right? I'm still got my right hand, my hand on this, I'm pulling it up like that. Just kind of holding it taut. That's all we're doing. And then what we do, we grab our best friend, the string crank, and what we do here is then we turn it. And you want to make sure that you're turning it so that the string is wrapping on the inside. So in this case, I'm wrapping it clockwise. On this side, the thicker strings, I'm going to be wrapping it counterclockwise. So now all I'm doing is I'm going to turn it. And feel it getting taut, and hopefully we'll get about 3 to 4 winds. If you get a little more, I wouldn't worry about it. And just keep turning it. That's what I'm doing here right now. Still holding it with my right hand. And we pull this, just turn this a little tighter. I release. And there we go. Now I haven't checked the tuning at all. I just got it somewhat taut right now. We're going to check the tuning later. Though one other thing you want to do on your acoustic guitar, in fact you'll probably want to do this on all the guitars, is make sure that the ball of that string is firmly into the bridge. Sometimes it gets a little stuck somewhere. You want to make sure it's in there. If it's not, you may want to loosen it. Pull a little bit, just gently pull in it to get it tight. On the acoustics, you just want to make sure that you're pressed firm in here. In this case, it is. Sometimes they may tend to want to pull out. Don't worry, it's okay. You just loosen a little bit and kind of redo the process here with the peg, and just make sure it's pressed firmly in. You want to try and do this with your hands. So, I've had a couple of times on some older guitars where I've had to kind of give it a little bit of a tap. Be very careful with that. You don't want to damage anything. I would advise against it unless it's extreme conditions, and just push it taut like that. And right now we are set for now. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to come right back. I'm going to do that same exact procedure for the other 5 strings, and I will be right back. Just real quick on this one here, I'm going on the other side of the posts. I'm doing everything that I told you to do, except just remember that you're going to bend inside. So in this case, it's going to be this way. Crimp it, go underneath, like I told you, and then you go over, crimp it. And it should hold in place, and then you pull it taut with your right hand, and then use the good old-fashioned crank. And we're off to the races. Catch you in a minute. So what I've done is I grabbed my tuner. Now the one I'm going to use is a good old reliable Boss chromatic tuner. I use this for sometimes as a foot pedal. It's also great just to use right now, just to check your tuning. You don't have to use this one. Find a tuner that's good for you. Some of you guys like to use the ones that you clip on here. Some like to use tuners that are on the phone. Make sure it's a good one. I like the Peterson chromatic tuners. Those are really nice. I do have that app. It is on the phone right now that is recording, so I can't show you that one. Those cost a few bucks, but they're also really nice. You can, if you have the adapters, you can plug it into your guitar. If you have your electric, you will definitely have to plug in. And then go from there. All right, so I'm going to plug this into mine. Mine's an electric acoustic. Obviously, you want to make sure the volume's up so that it receives the signal. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take it through each of the strings, and we want to make sure that we're tuned to the correct note that you want it to be: E, A, D, G, B, and E. Be aware of that, especially if you haven't done this before. You don't want to tune to F or to G. Make sure that whatever your tuner is tuned to the note it's supposed to be tuned to. If you're not sure, most of your tuners, especially if you got some new ones, you can check the instructions. They will show you what your tuner should read for the proper tuning for the guitar. In this particular case, I'm going to turn my tuner on, and it's going to read for me where we're at. Right now it reads as a C, and what we're going to do is we want to get that up to an E. Now, one question could be, why didn't I go down? Does that C feel too, like it might be too high? Maybe I got to lower it. You got to be careful of that as well. The one thing I could say, especially if you're in the beginning stages, you'll have these other 5 older strings. Feel the tension. It'll be very, very, very obvious if you have to tune low and this thing is really flabby. It's probably going to be, if I went down to this low E here like this, I'm still going really low. It's like I'm almost going to lose my, it's really flabby. You know that that's not what it's going to be. So we have to go in the other direction. Be careful if it's too high. You will definitely feel too tight. And this is where the danger comes in. You have to be very careful because you could break a string if you're not careful with that, okay? So when you initially are tuning these things up, just give a little, have the strings feel a little loose so it feels like it's looser than it's supposed to be. That'll pretty much assure you that you're lower than what you're supposed to be than as opposed to higher. It's really kind of a feel thing. Be very, very, very careful with that. Otherwise you're going to break a string and go through that whole process again with that string. So what we want to do right now is I'm tuning everything up to where it needs to be. And hear that? Did you hear that sound, that click? That was here at the peg. So the peg wasn't in all the way. So what just happened is it just popped up a little bit. Okay, just a little bit. Just push it down. Should be okay. If it's not, it's going to pop out. Don't worry, like I said. Just loosen it. Just kind of pull it taut, make sure it's in, and then you can restring it up here at the post. All right, I'm glad that kind of happened so you can see that. So what happened though is that the tuning went down. It dropped. That's another sure sign that it was loose initially. So now it should be pretty tight and it's holding its tuning. And now we're at B, and that's up at E here. So I'm going to go through the tuning right now and tune this whole guitar, and I will be right back. So now the guitar is tuned. No, we're not done. What we have to do now is make sure that these strings are stretched out. This is where I commonly see things fail when people try to tune the guitars. I've even seen it done at shops where they don't do this. Now they do sell tools. I don't have one here. So what I do is I'm tuned to the string. And what I like to do is I just pull now gently. You don't do this really hard or you're going to break the string. But you just grab the string like this and you just gently give it a tug. You pull up. Pulling up, I don't know if you can see this, I'm pulling up, and then I just kind of pull, give it a little tug to the inside of the neck. Just a couple times. And what will happen is the tuning will go flat. That's okay. That means it needed to be stretched out, because if you didn't do this, you're going to have a lot of trouble for the next couple days. It's going to go out of tune drastically. So I just go up and down the neck a few times, check the tuning, it's still flat. Generally speaking, you're going to probably go at least 3 times with this procedure. It could be 4 or 5, depending. If it's happening a lot, that might mean a couple of things. It could mean that something's not tight here on your electric, or it might be that you're loose here, something's not tight, or it could also be a bad string. That could happen. You're going to know really quick because it's going to break. Just happens. Sometimes it goes through the manufacturing and it just doesn't come out yet. Unfortunately, that's the reality of guitar world. We have to live with it sometimes. So what I'm doing here now is I'm going through a few times. It goes flat. And then eventually it's going to do this where so that when I'm done, it will it doesn't go out at all. It might go a little bit flat, but when it's really, really close, then I'm going to say it's fairly stretched out, at least as stretched out as I'm going to be able to make it. You'll notice too that what I'm doing here is when I do this with my hand, I'm also holding this hand down here by the nut. The reason I do that is just so it doesn't pop out of these grooves. See these little nut grooves? So I just kind of hold it down, just gently. You don't have to hold it really tight, just so it doesn't pull out of the groove. And then all right, so that E is pretty well tuned. The B is a little out, so I'm going to go through the same process. You can use your fingernails. If you're not comfortable with that, use a towel. You can grab a towel and just kind of go through it like that too. And because sometimes you can you know, mess up your fingers, mess up your nails. So you just use a towel or a rag, a clean rag, of course. This one won't weigh out. And you just keep going until you get it. I'm going to get the rest of them stretched out and get right back to you, so stay tuned. They are stretched out. Pegs are all in on your electric. Everything should feel nice and taut and well adjusted. So we're done, right? Nope, one last thing. Please, 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 please get your side cutters and cut these off. I don't know, some people like the look of it. I think it looks stupid. You're gonna poke somebody's eye out if you swing it the wrong way as well. So please, you know, trim off the excess strings here. You can just take your side cutter as close to the post as you can go and just cut them out. Much neater, less chance for injury, especially if you're a student, you sit with a teacher and he wants to take a look at something and that string pokes him in the eye. That wouldn't go over very well, I don't think. So that's what we do. We cut all this. In addition, all the older strings I threw out. You may actually, a good idea too, is just to keep them, wrap them around in a circle and put them in your case just in case something breaks. You don't have a fresh string handy. You could still grab an old string just to get you through if you're on a gig or you're hanging out with somebody. So the guitar is all tuned. You'll want to play through it. It may take a couple times still, or a string or two might fall out a little bit of tune. No big deal. It just means it's not fully stretched. And hopefully in time, you've got this thing nice and tuned. Strings will sound fresh. They'll sound better. You will definitely notice the difference on that. And I hope this helped you out. This is how you string your guitar. As I explained earlier, note that the posts on these are locking tuners. You won't be doing windings. You may have one or a half a winding. In this particular PRS, what I did is I actually went on to PRS's site. There's actually a video, and they actually also do have an explanation of how to string these things. It's really just simply pulling it taut, tightening it, and getting it to tuning, and you're ready to roll. And then of course you'll still stretch out the strings. It goes really, really quick. They're really sweet. One other thing, and this is really kind of a big deal for all you guys who have what's called floating bridges. Floating bridges generally will have a whammy bar. It moves up and down. So if you have one of these types of bridges and you're tuning the guitar, especially when you're starting at the beginning, you're going to note probably going to take a couple extra times to get it tuned. And the reason being is that the bridge, the tension is adjusting. So what I often do when I start out, if I took all the strings off, I'll get all the strings just as I did, just get it so the tension is sort of okay. And then I'll start with the lower string and I'll get it close to the tuning that it's supposed to be. I might actually tend to tune it a little sharper. And then I go through all of them a little sharp until I get to the end and maybe exact tuning. This is kind of a science you're going to have to sort of experiment with. The tuning will definitely change because of the floating bridges. Now, floating bridges nowadays are a lot better than the older ones. I got some older ones that it's a pain in the butt to try and get those things tuned up because they have these little fine tuners, and that's a whole other story unto itself. I'm not a big fan of those, but just be aware that it's going to probably take you a couple extra times. You may actually have to tune a little bit sharp so that by the time you get to the last string, everything is sort of eased up. And then you can fine tune it. So just be aware of that when you have these floating bridges. It could take an extra couple times to get it finely tuned, but you will get it tuned and it will sound awesome. On your Strats, your Strat style guitars, some of them will have what they call a tree. You can see it, it's got little posts. As you're taking the strings off, you'll note that your strings do go underneath them. In this case, on this guitar, it's these 4 strings right here. It's not the 2. So one goes on one side, one goes on the other. So when you're stringing it back in, make sure you go underneath that and then go into the post. And if you haven't done this before, just do one string at a time. Just see how the older string works its way through, but don't miss that, okay? You want to make sure that you have that strung in there.